Okay, so in this segment, we're going to talk about what happens after the death of Robespierre and the Reign of Terror in France, and whether or not the revolution really keeps going or it dies out, and also about Napoleon Bonaparte and his early life and how he's going to start to play a big role in this revolution. So after the Reign of Terror, everyone kind of looks around and realizes that something has to be done to make sure that nobody runs away with all the power again like Robespierre did during the Reign of Terror. So a new constitution, a fourth government, is created in 1795 called the Directory. And the Directory is a democracy, but it's very, very limited. And the idea is they want to make it as difficult as possible for somebody to, again, run away with all the power, like Robespierre did during the Reign of Terror with the Committee of Public Safety. So the way the Directory worked is that out of the French population, there were certain people who were qualified voters. So basically, to be a qualified voter, you had to be a property-owning male or a veteran of the war against Austria and Prussia. Now, of those qualified voters, only a few of them were electors, which are qualified voters who were in a high tax bracket, which means they paid more taxes because they were rich. Now, of the electors, you could either be appointed to the Council of Ancients, those were people who were over 40 and gave advice to the government, or to the Council of 500, and they were kind of like the Congress or the National Convention of this new government. And then, finally, from the Council of 500, you could elect the 5 directors as the Directory, and they were 5 men who led France. All of their decisions had to be unanimous, meaning all 5 had to agree for any law to be passed. Now you can imagine getting 5 people to agree on a law is very difficult to do. So the problem with this government is that the directors could never agree on anything, no laws ever get passed, and you see bread prices skyrocketing to the same price that they were under Louis. You see people getting poorer, and nothing is really getting done in France. So that's why this is an ineffective government. Now, meanwhile, let's back it up a little bit and talk about this Napoleon Bonaparte. Napoleon was born on the island of Corsica, which is between France and Italy. When he was 9, he was sent to military school. He was from a bourgeoisie family, so the only way to really rise up in social status at this time, because of the old regime, was to become a military officer. So he goes to military school at age 9, and he shows his intelligence early on. He shows that he's very good with battle strategy, and that is going to serve him well because when he's 15, he graduates from military school and goes to a very elite military college in France. Finishes the 2-year program in only 1. So we know that Napoleon is a pretty smart guy, and he's rising up pretty quickly. And this is Napoleon when he was younger. So his early military career during the war against Austria and Prussia in the French Revolution, Napoleon rises to a high rank in the army, and in fact it's because of his success on the battlefield that a lot of this war turns around and actually starts to work in France's favor. So this impresses the National Convention, but he also impressed the National Convention during an uprising in Paris in 1795. In 1795, right before the Directory was created, royalists, so people who wanted to bring back the king, staged a protest outside the National Convention. So the National Convention ordered Napoleon to control the crowd with his troops, and he said, I can take care of this crowd with what he said was a whiff of grape shot. And grape shot is kind of like shrapnel that you shoot right out of a cannon. And he brought these cannons right in front of the protesters, told them to leave. When they wouldn't leave, he fired the cannons right in their faces. They didn't think that would happen. I mean, before, when they've had protests and uprisings, usually the troops will get rough with them, but you'd never expect cannons to be fired on a crowd of protesters. So this is a very alarming situation for the protesters. And as you can see from the sketching, it's chaos. There's people killed, there's people injured. It is an extreme reaction to this protest. But it also shows us that Napoleon is a pretty extreme man, and he believes in getting things done, no nonsense, and whatever way he thinks is appropriate. So regardless, he was able to save the National Convention from this crowd and got a lot of support from people in the government during this episode. So, how does he rise to power? After the Reign of Terror, the Directory rules France, like I said, with very little success. They can't get anything passed. The directors themselves are trying to overthrow each other because they're so frustrated. And Napoleon decides in 1799 that enough is enough. he could probably run this country better than the Directory could. So he overthrows the government in a planned coup d'etat, which in French literally means to sweep out the government. In 1799, with the help of Abbé Sieyès, who we are already familiar with, he was actually one of the directors. He and Napoleon's brother, who was the president of the Council 500, organized this coup where they arrest the directors and they disband the Council of 500, and they create this new government, a fifth government now, called the French Consulate, where there will be three leaders. Napoleon is the first consul, another guy, Roger Ducos, is the second consul, and Abbé Sieyès will be the third consul. But as we'll see in class when we read the documents, Napoleon doesn't really see this as three guys working together, but more so as Napoleon running the show. So that is Napoleon's rise to power as leader of France, and stay tuned for the next video.